Hi again. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about this week is the Great War or World War One. And this is really hard for me to teach without maps. So, I'm going to do a PowerPoint with some images to talk over as well. But I wanted to give kind of a basic understanding of it first, a kind of an introduction. World War One is something that was incredibly important. It's been 100 years since the end of World War One. Again, I'll have a PowerPoint with images and some of the different things to look at. For the United States, this wasn't as big of a deal in the beginning. This was really a European conflict that the United States got in to right at the end, the last couple of years. But it reshapes all of Europe. It reshapes the balance of power. It reshapes what people realize the world can be. It's the first really modern war, total war of the modern age, the first really 20th century conflict that kills millions and millions of people. The scale of World War One is greater than any other war. And of course, it's known as the Great War at the time because they didn't know that there would be a World War Two. So it was the Great War, the World War. We call it World War One because we know there was a World War Two. And in reality, World War One was a huge cause of World War Two. It was one of the major factors that led to World War Two. So I want you to have kind of an understanding about World War One, how it starts. This is my specialty. I teach World War One, World War Two, at the upper level and at the graduate level, and so you're going to get a different knowledge base out of this topic than you would probably with any of the other professors, just because this is really what I do and what I specialize in, and I think it's really important. Um, so when we talk about the war in Europe and talk about what's going on, it's really important to remember the timeline. We think about Europe and we think about the world wars, and it's obvious that these things are going to happen because they did, and we can look back with hindsight, but it's important to realize how fresh things are. So we've got Germany, and we've got Italy, and we've got these big countries that we know today and are very familiar with today. But in the reality, when this conflict starts in the 19 teens, these are new countries. Right? They had been empires: the Prussian Empire, the Roman Empire, the different you know empires. I guess is the simplest thing for our purposes. Uh, it's not until the 1870s that you have Germany as a nation state. Kind of with a form of a political being that is similar to what we have today. Italy as a nation state. Um, so if you think about this, these countries are as nation states are only 50 years old. Well, you know, the 1970s are 50 years ago. Uh, you know, I mean, this is not that long ago. Uh, you have old conflicts and old wounds that people are still mad about. The Franco-Prussian War, different things like that were huge conflicts where they had battled over territory for centuries on and off. And they had just most recently battled for these things just 50 years prior. So these are old wounds that had festered for a while. Two, I think it's important that you think about this war, and again, this is a global war. Millions and millions of people around the world are killed in this conflict. Uh, and you add in the fact that so many of these royal families, so many of the leaders of these different nations are related. They're cousins, brothers, all of those kinds of things. The interwovenness and interbreeding, really, of the European royal families in these centuries leading up to the 20th century is really quite close. They would write letters to each other, dear cousin, and things like that. So this is personal to a certain extent. And the biggest thing with this conflict is nobody quite got it. Right? They didn't quite understand what was going to happen. They didn't understand that this was a modern war, a 20th century war, an industrialized war. So think of all those industrial pieces that we, have developed in the late 19th century, and then add them into a military conflict. Right? Barbed wire is going to be used in the war, where we think of it as a good way to keep the buffalo from running over your crops. It's used as a defense mechanism. It's used as part of this war. You have the airplane being used as part of this war. You have the chemical components of the technology. So these chemical, you've got these chemical components, things like mustard gas, phosgene gas, chlorine gas, that had all been developed during the industrial era. Now they're going to be used as weapons, where you're getting the different opponents, the different countries gassed one another in this conflict. So it's a total war, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So before I talk about total war and more of those details of it, I want to talk just for a few minutes about how it got started, because this is something that gets kind of twisted at the end of World War I, where Germany is blamed, which helps lead to World War II. So I think it's important for you to understand how it began, and I have a handy chart that I think is fun. So the big takeaway should be the start of World War I was a hot mess. I think that's a pretty good summary of it. But let's go through a little bit and let you see. I'll pause while I erase. All right. So World War I was a global war. And keep in mind that we're really talking about empires. Just like the United States fought in that Spanish-American War, think of World War I as a global war in that way as well. All right. So there's two sides. There's the Central Powers. And then there's the Triple Entente. They become known as the Allies because, spoiler alert, that's the side we end up on. Okay. So we've got these two sides of the conflict. So how does this start? Well, it starts in part with Austria-Hungary. This is part of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, which again, I'll have a PowerPoint with the pictures, with the map for you. But you've heard about Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the empire's throne, right? The heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He gets assassinated. It's really a nasty assassination. It's one of those moments in time where there had been an attempt at the assassination by this group called the Black Hand, the Serbian nationalist group. They had failed. The carriage had rushed off. The carriage with the Archduke and his wife in it had rushed off to get away from the assassination attempt, and they had stopped some way away, and they stopped right in front of a member of the Black Hand, pure chance, who then walked up and killed the Archduke. Really tragic, right? So Austria-Hungary figures out who it is, and declares war on the Serbia. Now we'll look at a map in the PowerPoint, but Serbia is a really small country compared to Austria-Hungary. And they're like, we're going to finally take you. You're annoying. We've wanted this land for a long time. We're just going to rub you out. Easy peasy, right? Well, one of the things, and your textbook author talks about this, is you've got these what are called entangling alliances, where you have these different countries who've made alliances with one another and to protect one another, to go to war if the other one goes to war. but they didn't tell anybody else about it, right? This is a dumb thing. Right? If you've got the biggest bully on the block who's in your back pocket, right, and is going to be your friend, you let everybody in the schoolyard know the big bully is your friend and nobody's going to pick on you, right? Well, Serbia doesn't do that. They don't tell anybody. And Serbia happens to be friends and allies with Russia. Now look at your big old map, and Russia is huge, right? The Russian Empire is huge. This is when it is Russia and is the Russian Empire, so it's just phenomenal in its size. And Russia is allied with Serbia and kind of wants to take some land from Austria-Hungary. Anyway, so Russia says, you can't pick on my little friend. I'm going to declare war on you. So Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary's like, oh man, I wouldn't have picked on Serbia if I thought Russia was going to get involved, but we're in it now, so let's go for it. And oh yeah, we've got friends of our own. And so Austria-Hungary happens to be allied with Germany. And Germany's like, okay, bring it on, Russia. We're in this. It's all good. So they declare war on Russia. Okay, this is getting pretty big. Remember, we're not just talking about the countries, we're talking about the empires that are fighting one another. Just like we fought against Spain and the Philippines, Russia has an empire, Germany has an empire, much of Africa has been carved up, much of Asia is being carved up. So we're talking about battles of empires here, right? Well, Russia has a kind of ally, but mainly it's because they hate Germany. So France gets involved. Right? Now, obviously, France and Germany have a shared border, and they'd been fighting for generations over different land. And France and Germany had fought in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. France was pretty ticked off about it still and decides, now's our chance, and declares war on Germany. Says, you know what, Germany, now's our opportunity. We're going to take that land back, and we're going to put you in your place. So this is very personal. Right? This isn't really about Serbia and poor Serbia. This is about France being ticked off at Germany, so we're going to declare war on Germany. Right? So Germany's happy because Germany's ticked off at France too. It's like, oh, France, you guys are just wimps. We're going to go and we're going to take your land back and even more, and you just watch out. And they were kind of excited about it. Right? And the reality is everybody was excited about it. The summer of 1914, which is when all of this is occurring, was called the Summer of Madness because they're just so excited to go to war. They're just crazy about it. And they all think they're going to win. They all think they've got this new technology and they've got these new ideas and they're going to go in and wipe the other side out. Well, the reality is they're not going to be able to do that because they all have the same new technology. And it just turns into this real disaster. But Germany's excited. So Germany is going to get to France by going through Belgium. Right? This little neutral Belgium, which is on the north of France. And again, I'll show you on the map so you can see that. But Germany goes through Belgium, who was neutral. And Great Britain says, you can't go through neutral Belgium. Right? So they're not really allied with France. But so I'm not going to make the same mark. Great Britain declares war too. Right? And the biggest thing that I say in my classes that gets repeated over and over, which seems ridiculous for an American history class, is the sun never sets on the British Empire. The British Empire is a global empire. It goes all the way around the world, and the sun literally never sets on it. So now they see an opportunity. Germany's going to be in trouble here. They see an opportunity to take some of that German territory and take some of that Russian territory and take some of this Austro-Hungarian territory, and they're going to be in this. So all of a sudden you have this battle among the empires. And the big question is, who's really responsible? Who starts this? In the end, Germany will be blamed for it. But you can see it's a hot mess. Everybody's involved, and everybody just wants to take some territory. Now, other central powers that we're going to see over here, Bulgaria. And what we call today Turkey, it was really the Ottoman Empire, which was collapsing. So I'll put a slash here. This is kind of a last gasp for the Ottoman Empire. And then other allied powers are going to include Belgium, Bolivia, Brazil, China, Costa Rica, Cuba, Ecuador, Greece, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Italy. Italy actually starts with the Central Powers and then flips partway through the war to the Allies. So they're an interesting space, right? Italy, Japan, Liberia, Montenegro, Nicaragua, Panama, Peru, Portugal, Romania, San Marino, Siam, Uruguay, and eventually the United States. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick rundown of how it all starts, and we'll get into more details in a minute. Okay.